Just how good is this Penn State team? Well, they certainly reminded us just how good they were against Washington.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch. Every single day we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. My name is Zach Seyko. I am your host of the show. Penn State wins 35-6 over the Washington Huskies, and this is the live reaction. It was a pretty late night, Saturday night game. I got an instant recap in there after we were settled, but I felt it was more appropriate to do the live show Sunday mid-morning before the NFL kicks off. So if you have a question, if you have a thought about Penn State's performance, let me know down in the comments section. Be a part of the discussion. For Penn State, I think they reminded me, I never changed my opinion of this Penn State football team in terms of its overall season goals based on the Ohio State game. That was a 7-point deficit. And to see them defeat Washington a lot more convincingly than I expected them to, I thought this was going to be the classic case of the hangover game. Slow start. Washington is doing things well. That is not a bad Washington team. That is a team that was made through the transfer portal, is in the middle of a rebuild, but certainly has quality coaches and quality players. And Penn State could have been on the downward spiral, and they weren't. I mean, certainly Washington was on the upward trend, and Penn State had its best first half performance all season. West Virginia probably would be second. There's Kent State, I guess, but Kent State that doesn't exactly count. So my point being is that Penn State put together its best performance in the first half, got rid of the slow. Wouldn't have been surprising had they had the slow start against a Washington team. Penn State did a lot of things well. Ground game was effective. I thought play calling was better. I mean, it helps when you're able to move the ball efficiently and effectively. So Andy Kotelnicki's going to have an easier time calling plays. But Penn State got back into rhythm. And I hope they reminded the general public that this is a college football playoff team. And they're not a fringe college football playoff team. This is a team that can make a little noise in the college football playoff depending on the matchup. There are really at this point for me, Oregon, Ohio State, and Texas are the only teams that I look at in the college football playoff, and I say, in terms of the rankings, and I look at Penn State's a clear-cut underdog. That is what I take away from the Washington game, is the fact that Penn State is so close to being an elite caliber team. They just need to put it all together. It's not because they don't have the coaching staff. It's not because they don't have the players. It's Penn State. Penn State's biggest enemy is Penn State, and I will stand by that. So within regard to Washington, I thought that would have been a close game. The fact that Penn State blew them out of the water, the fact that they went up 28-0 at the end of the first half, when all season long, slow start, slow start, slow start. And they got it together in a moment where the slow start would have been justified. And it was a dominant performance across the board. Every single position group looked good. The coaching staff looked good. There's very few criticisms. Now, I have my concerns about this team moving forward, because what about Nicholas Singleton's absence? Is he going to be ready for a college football playoff run? Because Penn State's finishing 11-1. Penn State is going to finish 11-1. They have Purdue, which we just got the initial spread for. We'll talk about that. Minnesota just lost to Rutgers. And Maryland to finish up the season. Penn State's going to finish 11-1. They are better than all three of those teams. Oh, but Minnesota's a road game. That's a trap game. I look at that game the same way I do Wisconsin. If you take away Minnesota's ground game, you can beat them easily. You just need to take away the running game. And Penn State has been suited. Penn State has been best suited to win in a variety of ways, ways that they couldn't win in the past. They can now win in a multitude of ways, and that's what makes them a college football playoff team. They are a sleeper. They are a sleeper to make a deep run. I'm talking semifinals. And again, it depends on the matchup. So I'll go on record and say that if they get a favorable matchup, you could don't discount Penn State. Oh, they're going to lose in the first round immediately. There's no way they get past the quarterfinal. That is not true. Could they lose those games? Yes, but I think Penn State's chances are greater to push past the first round into the quarterfinal and potentially into the semifinal than it is getting bounced and getting upset in the first round. They're going to host a home college football playoff game. The way things are aligning, this is the 5 seed because it's going to take a lot to win the conference championship game. It's going to get into the conference championship game first and foremost. You would need a lot of things to happen, and then understanding the tiebreakers. So Ohio State would have to lose to Michigan, for example, and then Indiana would have to lose to Ohio State. And Oregon would have to keep doing so the only scenario for that is Penn State would beat Oregon, and a lot needs to happen in the Big Ten Conference Championship for Penn State to get that bye. So right now, the way things are projecting, Penn State should be the 5 seed and host that group of 5 team, the 5 versus 12 matchup, and then you get the 4 seed. You're most likely going to get that Big 12 team in a neutral site. So who's that? BYU, potentially Colorado, Utah. Not Utah. No, sorry, excuse me. I'm thinking of the old Utah teams of the past. It's really BYU's in the driver's seat because that 1-point win yesterday, and then Colorado is kind of on the outside looking in, but they could do something. And I don't want to mention West Virginia, but I guess they're still there because they only have 2 conference losses. Tiebreakers are a crazy thing, so we'll see how that goes. So Penn State would face the group of 5 team, would get the 4 versus 5 matchup against probably a favorable Big 12 opponent, and then let the chips fall where they may. You get into the semifinal because Penn State would be favored over Colorado. Penn State would be favored hypothetically over BYU. And if you look at the other conference champions, or even out of the ACC, we kind of knew that Miami wasn't as good as advertised. We knew that. And I thought Penn State would be in that matchup, would beat a Miami, would beat a Clemson. So whether it's the Big 12 or the ACC in that 4 versus 5, right? That's my point, is that Penn State is not far away from Ohio State and Oregon. Are they not as good as them? Are they not? Those are the elite teams. That is true, but the gap, the margin of error is so small, and Penn State reminded us of that against a quality Washington team. Washington's not great, but they have a lot of talent. They're in the middle of a rebuild coming off of a national championship runner-up team. And it's not fair to just cast judgment and say, well, they're bad. No, they just don't have it figured out. And honestly, they were figuring it out, and then Penn State kind of put that to rest, right? Drew Aller had an efficient game. The ground game was better, back to what it should be. Offensive line did its job in pass protection and run blocking. Penn State played angry. Penn State felt like it had to prove something there. That's a lot to take in. I will say this, all the criticisms that people might have about James Franklin, his team is bought in to him, the coaching staff, and to what they're trying to do for the season. Because I have never walked away from even after some of the worst losses that I've seen for James Franklin, or the ones that just kind of are the biggest punches to the gut. Because this Ohio State game does not define Penn State's season. All their goals are still in front of them, and it's to get to the college football playoff and make some noise, and potentially, again, if the stars align, you can make a run if you're Penn State. That never changed based on the Ohio State game. So it was a gut punch, but every player is bought in. They're not looking around saying, "Man, James Franklin can't do this. Why are we playing alongside James Franklin?" That's not the case here. So this team is still bought in. So whatever doubts you have about James Franklin as far as his ability to lead, it's wrong. It's wrong. Because he can motivate these players, and they're always bought in. So Penn State has everything going for them, and being the 5 seed is an excellent finish for this team, and it sets up favorably for them going into the college football playoff. Check in on your comments here. Go through any questions, thoughts that you have about the game. Talk about the Nicholas Singleton situation, Tyler Warren, Abdul Carter, some key player performances that really separate this team apart from the rest of the college football landscape. And we'll talk about that and more on the other side of this break. And today's live episode, is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet just $5 and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. And it's all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com today and join today. And if you look over at FanDuel.com, the lines are out for Penn State versus Purdue. Penn State is a whopping 4-touchdown favorite, minus 28.5 on the spread, minus 10,000 on the money line. If you're betting Purdue money line, it's plus 2,800 for anybody that is interested. And the total is set at 49.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them right now over at FanDuel.com. Again, that is FanDuel.com. And if you want to bet Penn State to win the College Football Playoff Championship on FanDuel, that's plus 2,000. That is plus 2,000. Remember, you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is over at FanDuel.com. Let's check in on the comments section here on the live show. Andy Kotelnicki won't let the offense stall again after last week's showing. Great to see so many young players get in the game. Corey Smith was a nice spark, going 80. Andy Kotelnicki got back to... So I'm glad we get to address Andy Kotelnicki first, actually, because I'm more or less kidding in this situation, and I've already said this. But was Andy Kotelnicki taunting the Penn State fans, in a sense, with his play calling? Because... where was that against Ohio State? The Superman, Tyler Warren, goal line leaps into the end zone, and it's so difficult to stop. And you run it against Washington when you don't need it. Why are you using that against Washington and not against Ohio State? Hindsight is always going to be perfect 2020 vision. And the plays, Bo Pribula gets the first touchdown of the game against Washington, and I'm just sitting back and I'm saying, okay, this is great, this is nice, but this is difficult to process when you don't need this against Washington, but you needed it against Ohio State. Hindsight is 2020, but I felt like you could have won against Washington without those kinds of plays. And Ohio State, you certainly needed them, especially in the goal-to-go situations. You got down there, you got down to the 5-yard line twice against Ohio State, and you couldn't punch it in. But against Washington, when you had your way all day offensively, and that's when the gimmicky plays happened to be there. So I guess you could make the argument that Penn State needed it to build momentum and jump out to the 28-point lead. I disagree. I think running Katron Allen and before Nicholas Singleton was absent for the remainder of the game, that they would have been just fine. Corey Smith is a big deal, so I'll talk about that when I get to Nicholas Singleton. Hashtag give Franklin his raise. Again, another raise. Not everyone's going to agree with you there. Franklin fanatics, so that makes sense why you would say that. Washington now 5-5 is a total joke. I mean, Washington's not a good team. Or Penn State's that Penn State's that much better, because Washington won by 2 touchdowns against Michigan. Indiana had won against Washington by 2 touchdowns, and then Penn State wins by 4 touchdowns there. So Penn State football should not overlook Purdue as a 20.5-point favorite, one game at a time. I don't think they should look past Purdue, but Purdue is definitely a game where you can get key players in. Look at it this way. So Penn State's going to look at this as we need to build a lead early, maintain that lead, and some key rotational players can get in the game, and you can build some depth. And don't look past any opponent. Maryland, Minnesota, they're all Big Ten teams, but just know that Penn State is better than them. The only reason Penn State loses any of those games is because of Purdue. or excuse me, because of Penn State. The only reason Penn State is Penn State's biggest enemy. Ohio State would need to lose another regular season game for Penn State to get the 5 seed. That's true. Good point. Yes, I think the 6 seed is the best we can get. So thank you for pointing that out, actually. There are 3 Big Ten teams right now, and potentially a 4th with Indiana as long as they don't crumble. If they only lose to Ohio State, it is tough to see the College Football Playoff Committee leaving out an 11-1 Indiana team, because right now they're inside of the top 10, and everyone's argument is, well, this is a weak schedule. So it is going to be interesting with the way the conference champion gets into the top 4, which would be Oregon, or again, depending on some tiebreakers, Indiana, Ohio State, Penn State. Like, they're all vying. Like, all 4 of those teams are contending for the Big Ten Conference Championship appearance, if you will. And then whoever wins gets the top 4 seed. Most likely Oregon. Oregon would be the number 1 team, most likely. But if Ohio State happen to get in there, Penn State sneaks in there, wins. Right. So the 6th seed is a good point, because then Ohio State would be there unless they lose the second regular season game against either Indiana or Michigan. I mean, those are tough, or those are tougher games down the stretch for Ohio State. Never say never. Ohio State's going to be favored in there, but that is a good point about how Penn State would need Ohio State probably to lose another game. I also wonder, we've seen the College Football Playoff Committee almost penalize teams for losing that conference championship game. So maybe I am justified to say that, hey, Penn State being 11-1 and not being in the conference championship, but then Ohio State, hypothetically, again, we have to speak in hypotheticals here, they lose to Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. That would be a second loss. Penn State with 1 loss. It's weird. I don't know that I necessarily agree with it, penalizing a team losing because they have to play an additional game. But the College Football Playoff Committee has been inconsistent, or I mean, they're far from perfect. They're juggling a lot here because they have a 12-team playoff. So anything that we see is going to be unprecedented. There is no precedent here. I would not be surprised if Penn State's 5 and Ohio State is 6, based on that kind of Big Ten championship game where Oregon defeats Ohio State, because Penn State only has 1 loss and Ohio State has 2. I don't know how the College Football Playoff Committee would handle that, but it would not surprise me, it would not shock me if Penn State was 5 and Ohio State was the 6th seed. Either way, you're getting a home College Football Playoff game, and that was the preseason expectation. It seemed like the fan base, most of us talking about Penn State football, were content with, hey, if they host a if they get into the 12-team playoff and host a College Football Playoff game, win that playoff game, and then let's see what they do. Can they get on a roll? That seemed like a fair expectation for this Penn State team, and they're still set up to do that. So the 5 seed, the 6 seed, one way or another, Penn State needs to get in and win that home football playoff game in the opening round. I want to get away from I appreciate your comments, and we'll get back to them in the final segment too. But I want to talk about the Nicholas Singleton situation, because I feel like that's important. And if we have time, I'm only going to go live here for about another 10 minutes or so. So I want to get these subjects in, discussion topics. Nicholas Singleton disappeared in the game, was not on the sideline after the fact, and then was not made available for post-game interviews after the game, of course, meaning post-game. So that is a big deal. However, Penn State, there's a lot of layers to this. Corey Smith having a nice performance down the stretch in garbage time, and I don't want to take that away from him. That's a true freshman running back getting his first in-game action, and he rips off a relatively an 80-yard run. It's good for Penn State to have that, because look, Singleton not being available, hopefully the bumps and bruises, I don't have any inside information because James Franklin wouldn't reveal anything. And I think in the moment when James Franklin was actually asked about Nicholas Singleton, I don't think he's lying to us when he says, basically, in short, I don't know. Because he speaks to the team, addresses them, and then goes into the press conference with the media. He doesn't have time to talk to Nicholas Singleton or the trainers that might have been working with them and then getting a judgment. He's going to know the next day, Sunday, after talking to Singleton, the training staff, and saying, okay, what are we dealing with here? And then going through practice. We know that Singleton was dealing with unknown bumps and bruises. We know that for a fact. Is it something new, or did he re-aggravate whatever he was originally dealing with? We don't know. We just know that Singleton was not 100%, and his presence is more important for a playoff run than it is for Purdue, Minnesota, Maryland, because you can win with Kaytron Allen being the guy. We know that. If Kaytron Allen ends up being the guy who takes 100% of the workload, the problem now here is this is where Cam Wallace becomes extremely valuable. And he's out indefinitely. Hopefully Singleton is not out indefinitely. I'm okay if Penn State decides to rest Singleton for the remainder of the regular season and get him healthy in time for the playoff. Again, but we don't know the severity. We don't even know what the injury is. We just know that he's dealing with the ominous bumps and bruises, whatever that is in Singleton's case. At least with Drew, we knew it was a knee injury, which he seems to be dealing with just fine. Denied Dennis Sutton is not 100%, especially with the way that Penn State is playing him. They're just rotating him in as a backup defensive end. But he's dealing with a groin injury. We know these things because we saw it happen on live TV. But for Singleton, we don't know when he got hurt, actually, how it happened, and what it is. Hopefully it's not severe, because they need Singleton and Allen to be a 1-2 punch in the playoffs. And then hopefully Kaytron Allen can be 100% by taking on this workload. So Quentin Martin, Corey Smith, Penn State's also juggling the eligibility of those two players. They want to redshirt both of them. And if Martin is to play 3 more games in the regular season, because I think he's appeared in 2, and if he's appeared in 3, that's going to make this even tougher. But I think he's appeared in 2. Corey Smith has appeared in 1. If Martin were to play in 2 more games, he's safe. But if he plays in 3, then that burns his red shirt. And they don't want to do that. They do not want to do that. When you get to the playoff, red shirt, that doesn't matter. The playoff games are exempt from red shirt eligibility. So Corey Smith, proving his ability late in the game, you're going to rely on Kaytron Allen 99% of the time for the next few games. And then you're going to go to probably Corey Smith against Purdue if you need to. Here's who else you can go to. Bo Pribula. You can treat Bo Pribula as as essentially a running back who can pass. So Penn State at least has options. Cam Wallace not being available is not ideal. Nicholas Singleton certainly not being available is not ideal either. But Penn State does have options down the stretch to be able to win games effectively, preserve red shirts, and everything else. We'll go back to the comments section in just a moment and take your questions, take your comments to wrap things up. And if we get to it, we'll talk about Tyler Warren and Abdul Carter. But it's more important to get you involved in the conversation. We'll talk about that on the other side of this break. And today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. You got to download the Game Time app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks, and that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events to watch your favorite teams play live in person even easier than before. So what do Game Time Picks do? They filter out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on incredible seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. And if you look over on Game Time, so you can use the Game Time app or go to gametime.co. I have gametime.co pulled up for Penn State versus Purdue. If you're making the trip to the game, be safe, enjoy it. And you want to talk about lowest price guaranteed, that's what Game Time does for you when it comes to tickets. Game Time already has the best deals filtered out for me. Tickets available for this one. You can get into the west side of the stadium, section 122, row 31. This is a super deal on Game Time. And all in pricing included, $36, so there's no surprise fees at checkout, $36 per ticket. If you're looking for the lowest price, you can get into the north side behind the end zone, $13 per ticket, all in pricing, section 114, row 63 for Penn State versus Purdue. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account. Use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And we'll wrap up looking at the comments section again. See where I left off here. Ryan, thanks for the comment. I appreciate that. Zach, hey, Zach, great show as usual. We really appreciate that. Thank you so much for checking it out and being a part of the discussion. Steven, I would rather win a home playoff game than win the Big Ten. Ooh, that's an interesting debate, actually. Do fans, seriously, if Penn State happens to win all the tiebreakers, Indiana loses, Ohio State somehow loses to Michigan, and then it's Oregon and Penn State, because Oregon plays UCLA and Washington, if I'm not mistaken, to finish up the season. No, they already played UCLA. Let me see if I can get that. But my point standing is the fact that Oregon is probably not going to lose. Whereas at least you could, because that's the game, you could have the argument that, okay, maybe in a strange world that Ohio State loses to Michigan. And then Penn State gets into the Big Ten championship. And then if they were to beat Oregon in the Big Ten championship, they get the bye. So, okay, you're into the quarterfinal and it goes to the neutral site. So how do fans feel about that? Feel free to add to the comments section right now for the initial reaction to that. If Penn State were to, now Penn State would want the bye. Penn State the football team would absolutely want the bye. That's an extra week to rest, and you're already into the quarterfinal, and you would get a better seed and a more favorable matchup here. That would be interesting. You actually miss out on the college football, but that would take a lot. You would need Ohio State to lose a second game. You would basically need Ohio State to beat Indiana, Ohio State to lose to Michigan, and that's how that would happen. And that's a lot. That's a lot. Ohio State's going to be the favorite in that game. I expect them to beat Indiana, but never say never. College football is crazy this season. We have everything's unprecedented at this point. Anything that happens should not surprise anybody. Really, Georgia has 2 losses at this point. How do you approach that now? According to Sporting News, Bill Bender, I respect Bill Bender's work. I've spoken to him personally. He's a great guy. He has Penn State number 6 versus Ole Miss number 11 matchup in Beaver Stadium before the winner plays the number 3 BYU Big 12 champion. I think Penn State can beat Ole Miss. Remember, Ole Miss has 2 losses of its own. Georgia would have effectively knocked out Ole Miss had they won yesterday. Ole Miss would have had 3 losses. I don't see a 3-loss team getting into the college football playoff this season, at least in the first season. There's probably going to be an argument later as conference expansion and everything else. It's going to get crazy, but not this season. That's an excellent revenge opportunity, and that's late December. Penn State is going to be much more prepared for the impact of weather than an Ole Miss team is. And Ole Miss is a go, go, go type of offense. I think they have the number 2 offense in terms of yards per play. They might even have the number 1 offense. They also are one of the fastest offenses. They play quick, and that's nothing new. Lane Kiffin had played that way in the Peach Bowl against Penn State. But Ole Miss is very dependent on its aerial attack. So if you have gusty winds, snow, Penn State hopefully has its ground game in order and would have Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton available together. I would lean Penn State, but that's probably one of the closest matchups in the first round that Penn State would get. Alabama too. I think Alabama and Ole Miss are kind of similar there, but there is no, I would have to see what Ole Miss's remaining schedule is to even guarantee that they make the playoffs, because they are 1 loss away from being knocked out. Florida and Mississippi State, okay, so they're going to make it. They're going to make it. So we know that for a fact. That win against Georgia is huge for Ole Miss, because if they lost to Georgia, they're out. They're out. Good on Lane Kiffin. Good on Lane Kiffin to do that. We could beat Purdue with our entire second string playing. That's been proven. Bo Pribula leading the offense. Bo Pribula and Corey Smith in the backfield against Purdue would win. You wouldn't need to play Drew Aller and Katron or even Nicholas Singleton in this game. That they're going to beat Purdue and 28 points. I'm surprised it's not more, but I think 4 touchdowns on the road like that is fair, especially when Minnesota is a tougher game. Minnesota's defense is one of the best in the country, and I think I've lost count of how many interceptions they have as a defense. They force turnovers. Minnesota is great defensively. So if Penn State puts together a vanilla game plan against Purdue, I would not be surprised at all. And if they try to get backups in the game, So that's where 4 touchdowns is fair. They'll probably jump out to an early lead. They might go up 28-0 at half again. I would not expect, I would expect a fast start from Penn State once again. That was a different Penn State team that played last night. Yeah, it was, Frank. That was a team that played with a chip on its shoulder, that was angry. And there's a lot to be angry about. Because I go back to the point that I made that this football team is bought into James Franklin. Whatever criticisms you have about James Franklin, this football team, player A to player XYZ, they are all bought into what Franklin is doing and what Franklin is preaching. So to see the student section boo James Franklin, and as the team lines up for the alma mater after they lost by 7 points, they didn't get blown out by Ohio State. They should have beat them. But the student section to stand there and boo James Franklin and boo as the team is standing there, that's going to make them angry. They are certainly angry because they're all bought in. There is no doubt that they can in their minds, that they make the college football playoff. And I don't know why that was forgotten, even with the loss to Ohio State. That did not ruin the season. That was never going to ruin the season. If Ohio State beats Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, Ohio State is the number 1 seed. Well, that's what would happen. Yeah, so there's a lot of scenarios here. If Ohio State does beat Oregon, gets revenge in the Big Ten championship game, they would be the 1 seed, and Oregon would fall to 5 then. So you would need Ohio State to lose that. So Oregon would need to win out for Penn State to get that 5 seed. Splitting hairs there, but the difference between the 5 seed and 6 seed is going to be monumental, because the Group 5 team, projecting to be Boise State, is a lot more of a favorable matchup than Alabama or Ole Miss, as somebody has pointed out. James Franklin has Penn State as a high stability 10-plus win program in the Big Ten, which is consistent. They've just never been elite. And there's a lot of factors at play. And I could honestly devote an hour-long episode, an hour-long live show, addressing why Penn State hasn't gotten to that point that Ohio State has. There are a lot of factors that Penn State has finally caught up to, and that's why you see them so close here in 20. Like, they are so close. Ball bounces, literally, the ball bounces a different way. The refs call that a fumble with A.J. Harris and Quinshon Judkins. Cam Miller forcing it, A.J. Harris recovering it. The ball bounces a different way, and who knows, right? It was that, or if they just punch it into the goal line, if they just punch it in within the 5. So let's even take the hypothetical fumble out of the way. They punch it in within the 5 twice. They win that game 27-20. Go Buckeyes. Wow. Thank you, Ohio State, for checking in on the Penn State. I mean, this is a lot of Ohio State chatter in the Washington recap. So, of course, Minnesota loses to Rutgers to diminish the quality win. It would be chances they would have been ranked for our game. USC, West Virginia, right? All these kind of teams they didn't live up to expectations. A win's a win, because the College Football Committee clearly likes Penn State. They have them as the 5th best team, and then they were, make sure I have that one right too. They were 5th, and then they dropped down, or they were 6th, and they dropped down to 7th because of the conference the hypothetical conference champions and everything else. Yeah, so they're number 6 right now, and they would be 7th hypothetically against Notre Dame in the first college football playoff rankings. Penn State just needs to win out. But I will say this: if they lose any of these games, they're not going to lose to Purdue. They're much better than Maryland. Minnesota's kind of that, okay, just be careful here. Minnesota is better than those 2 teams, and they're well coached, and you've lost out there before. Don't do it again. You lose any one of these 3 games, Penn State has no shot at the college football playoff. A 10-2 Penn State team does not get in. They need to win out. But the nice thing is, they control their own destiny. I appreciate everyone checking out this live episode, live recap. After the whiteout game, Penn State defeats Washington 35-6, in control of their own destiny. Should end up with the 5 or the 6 seed, but never say never. And somehow, with a bunch of tiebreakers, could end up as a top 4 seed and get a bye. Oddly enough. But this is not a fringe college football playoff team. This is a team that can win multiple games, and if they get hot at the right time, with the right players available, they can make some noise in the college football playoff. Thank you so much for joining the live show. If you're not already, become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for all the latest conversations around not only Penn State football, but Penn State men's basketball and Penn State wrestling as well. I will see you next time here on the show.